Hello, everyone. Hi out there.
Hello.
So, welcome to the Musical QuaranStream. I am Glen.
I am Bree.
And we have Jenny has joined us in the chat. Hi, Jenny. Nice to see you back. And let's see. So, today, on the Musical QuaranStream, it is my turn to pitch a podcast-based musical. And the podcast I have selected for this time around is My Favorite Murder. And so I will be pitching shortly My Favorite Murder, the Musi-KILL.
Good play on words.
Thank you very much. I wish I could claim solo credit for that, but I think that pun has been used by other adaptations before, so, you know. But before we get started with that and everything, just want to say hi, check in. How's everybody doing out there?
Tired.
Yes. You can tell, Gabrielle, the lovely Breezes is usually the one who's bouncing off the walls.
I started a second job because I got furloughed for about a month, and I thought this would be a good way to earn some more money, and I'm very tired.
Yes.
And I'm thinking of quitting my second job after a week because it's very hard, and I am old.
Yes. And, you know, that sort of thing happens.
Yeah.
So things have been going around here. Things have been going. Jenny, yes, as Jenny says, it's been a long week or so. There's a lot of that going around.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah. So let's see.
I don't know much about this podcast, to be honest. I did read the Stay Sexy and Don't Get Murdered book.
Mm-hmm.
But I've not been a follower of the podcast. I know, like, my former colleague at Ohio State loved it, went to the tour, went to the live show, all that stuff. You love it. And I think overall a lot of people say, like, oh, I'll like it. And I knew Karen Kilgariff from her comedy musical albums and that type of stuff. But I haven't really gotten into it because I don't like scary things and things that... Here's all the way people can kill women.
Yeah, which admittedly, true crime in general as a genre, hey, Bristol is here. True crime as a genre tends to have a very female-heavy audience. And interestingly enough, tends to focus a lot on the many varied ways that women can die. And that's actually something that on My Favorite Murder they've discussed a lot is, you know, sort of the thing of like, as women themselves who have dealt with anxiety and mental health issues and things like that, when they discovered true crime as a genre, it was sort of like, oh, I'm not crazy. There actually are maniacs out there who want to, like, just hurt people.
Yeah.
So, which I'll get into a little bit in the pitch because I think I've got an interesting idea. I worry I might be going in a direction that is, well, that's not what anybody wants to see from a musical based on this podcast, but I think it's an interesting direction. We haven't had a whole lot of entertainment that we have enjoyed in the past week, aside from all of the stuff we typically watch.
Yeah, I mean, so. I think the hard thing is I was gone for 40 hours this week, and it was really hard work, and so a lot of it was coming home and getting out, you know, taking a hot shower and getting a heating pad and ibuprofen and laying down, because it's really hard to be on your feet for, 40 hours a week and being over, 30.
Yeah. And by the time you come home, having worked a job like that as well myself, not this past week, but having worked it in recent memory, when you get home from something like that, you just want to sit down and watch something that you know reliably is going to be entertaining.
Well, or even just like go straight to sleep. So, I mean, like the unfortunate, I guess, kind of problem is that meant Glen had to do all the chores, and Glen had to cook, and Glen had to take care of the cats, because, if I was working full time, like, there wasn't a lot of time for me to do that, and I don't know how people do it if they have kids. That must be impossible.
But we're keeping on.
Yeah.
We just watched, like, shortly before we started setting up for the stream today. We watched the Try Guys. Eugene ranks all of the Disney princesses. And I won't say much except that Merida was robbed. But, it's the Try Guys have been, like, the brunt of our entertainment, I would say.
Well, I think a lot of people who have been consistently posting on YouTube,
Yeah.
I think that that's kind of the harder thing is, we've gone without a lot of digital media for a long time, and even though like we've been getting more into it again, like we've on and off watched things from Disney Plus and HBO Max and Netflix and that type of stuff, but there's been such a long time because of moving twice this past year and the coronavirus and you working 2 jobs and me working 2 jobs, it just kind of turned into like, well,
yeah,
we only have time to watch a 7-minute silly video on YouTube, and there's a lot of people who are still creating content during the pandemic, whereas larger studios or things that were kind of in the pipeline really have kind of been eliminated. Like we used to really enjoy going to movies, and they're coming up with creative ways to show people movies, but that really hasn't been a lot of things that we've participated in, just due to the fact that I think some of the bigger releases have been kind of aimed towards families or kids. And I've heard Trolls was very good, but that was also just not something that was kind of in our wheelhouse that we were looking forward to, spending a rental fee on and watching that. So not bashing anybody that watched it and liked it. I'm sure it's very nice, and I'm sure when I see it on all the free, channels that we already won't pay for, but I'll watch it. But it's one of these things where I think that I've been really focusing much more on like my mental health journey and my physical health journey, kind of having legitimately like a rough 15 years, which I think a lot of us had. That's part about being an adult. I really haven't been looking outside to kind of fulfill that. I've been trying to focus inside and figuring out, how am I going to spend the next 15 years? And so I think that there's a lot of fun distractions, and we certainly really enjoyed watching the things from like the National Theater and Two River Theater in New Jersey, and that's been kind of like a lot of the theater side of it.
Yeah.
But it's been coming down to, if there is a 7-minute video, that's really quick and easy and nice enough to feel like you had a rest and feel like you had a break, and then kind of get back into doing what you kind of need to do in order to take care of yourself.
Which is, it's a fascinating thing as well, because like we know that we're not the only ones who are going through things that are disrupting schedules and causing craziness in our lives and things like that. If I can bring up an entertainment news story that I've been following, though, it's really interesting that in the midst of that issue of people not really having that much time to devote to all of this and everything, Quibi, which was supposed to be the first online channel dedicated to bite-sized entertainment you could consume on like the bus going somewhere or something like that, launched and promptly sank like a stone. It's still out there, but I
haven't watched any of it, so I feel like I can't comment on it. But I feel like, at least for us this past week, I think we've moved away from seeking out entertainment. Like, if it has been entertainment, it's been comfort entertainment. But we had, like, 2 really huge conversations this week. Number one was about the Starbucks Black Lives Matter situation, which has been very complicated and things that we've talked about a lot. And the other one had been protest music of the, U.S. against going to war and that type of stuff. And I think from like 1960s to modern day.
Which was launched by, we watched a video of Lindsay Ellis and her analysis of what protest music was like during the Bush years.
And so I think that we've been trying to figure out, what does this mean about our social, economic, political environment, and what does that mean for us, and, how do we help others and all that type of stuff. And so I think that it's more or less like there's a lot of things that we have found in ourselves that we want to do or we want to participate in, or we just have to admit, like, we're contributing to the problem or, there may be not anything that we can do. If there are more wealthy and more powerful people that feel hopeless, what can we do then at that point? And so, not to get all downer, like this is supposed to be fun, but just kind of being very honest. honest. We want to let you into our lives and kind of let us know, like, you know, what we're thinking about, and maybe your families are thinking about it as well, and maybe you're talking about it at home. And if you do want to contribute to our conversation, obviously this is going to be posted on YouTube, so feel free to talk about things that, you know, maybe how you've come to difficult decisions, or maybe how you've been motivated to reach out to your community more, or reach out to people and help other people. You know, we just know that, you know, as much as we like to contribute light and joy and music into everybody's lives, you know, it does sometimes come from more complicated, more serious places. And you should definitely, you know, evaluate why you think what you think, and, you know, is there a different way of thinking? And I think that that's just been kind of my motto, because my birthday was this past week. Is, you know, what am I taking for granted that I've always assumed was like a truth in my life? And, you know, where did I hear that? And how can I move forward? If I want to accept it as a truth and go forward with it, that's great. And if I want to say, like, no, that's not accurate for me anymore, how do I move forward? And so I think that we have had a lot of serious and deep thoughts, and I hope that it contributes to, you know, a better QuaranStream and better art and better music and better theater. And I think that that's kind of maybe appropriate for this week, that we haven't been distracting ourselves for more than 7 to 10 minutes at a time and then thinking heavy thoughts. I think we all go through that. So.
All right. So where we would typically have you should go check out this link, you should go check out this video, that sort of thing. I guess what we're saying is take a moment to pause and reflect.
Check yourself out, check your family out, see what everybody's doing, you know. I mean, I think that that's probably the most important. I think there's a lot of anxieties and just ideas and just stuff that I think people just really need to think about moving forward. Like, I have experienced a lot of guilt that I'm not doing more, and I think it's because when we were little, we were just like, oh yeah, if I was part of the civil rights movement, I do this or I do that. And it's a lot more complicated, it's a lot more simple, and I feel like there's a lot of things coming at us very quickly because of social media, which makes it a challenge as well. But I think that kind of understanding who we are and the choices that we're making, and ways that if we can't improve things, maybe not cause harm, and, you know, maybe see how little things can improve. And I think that by starting those dialogues with yourself and with your family members and with your friends are probably really important, because we do have that nice safe space provided by social distancing, that we don't all have to be in the same room and have high tensions. And as horrible as it is to talk about things on Zoom or over the phone or on the internet, I do think that it allows us to, you know, practice those conversations first. And, you know, be ready for when they occur. So, you know, definitely still check out things that are fun and share them with us. If you have something fun we should watch and lighten up, like, we are all ears.
Absolutely. Drop it into the chat. Tweet it at us. Our Twitters have been on the screen this entire time.
We wouldn't mind, for sure. Like, you can bring some joy and light to us. I've had a lot of people send me very cute gifts for my birthday on email and stuff like that. So, I mean, it's like we're into it. But I think that, you know, it just becomes a time in your life as we're approaching middle age, where, you know, we've lived great lives up until this point. How can we continue to live lives that we're proud of and that we're excited about? And I think that that's all things people with midlife crises go through. But we don't have money to buy a Ferrari, so we talk.
All right, so from talking about serious conversations and discussions and
to murder,
yes, to a much lighter subject, to murder. Let's talk about murder. All right, so so my favorite murder. I believe, Ginny, you're familiar with my favorite murder. Bristol, I don't think you guys, I've told you guys about it before, but basically My Favorite Murder is a podcast that is hosted by Karen Kilgariff and Georgia Hardstark. Karen is a stand-up comedian. She was for a long time one of the big names in, like, the LA comedy scene. So you may not have seen her on, like, HBO or something like that. She's not a Jerry Seinfeld or a Dave Chappelle, but she's someone who was really well known and making a really good living off of stand-up comedy. And Georgia is a television writer, is her background. So she was working writing in television, and they met socially in LA and really quickly bonded over a shared love of true crime stories. That, like, both of them basically saw TV shows like all of the Lifetime shows and the Investigation Discovery and all of those. Unsolved Mysteries as basically sort of like comfort food for them, like emotional comfort that they could just put that on.
Yeah, like I like Murder, She Wrote, but that's about as far as I'll go.
And they started up this podcast, My Favorite Murder, which kind of started as an idea of true crime being one of those things that people kind of think of that being a really weird thing to be into. Because it's like, well, what is this? Do you have, like, the mind of a serial killer and you like crime and things like that? I think it's a lot
more common now.
Yeah,
like,
it's common now.
I know, like, there's always one or two people in everybody's family that was what they were obsessed with. Like, my sister really liked this type of stuff as well. Yeah. I also know, like, we have a lot of friends who have acted in that type of stuff, including this guy to my left.
But it's one of those things that's sort of like a guilty pleasure for a lot of those people.
Yeah, like, I feel like it was really readily available more as, like, this is kind of trashy viewing. Yeah. And so it's like, if you kind of want to live vicariously, if you feel like... I think it was always kind of pushed on, oh, here's these housewives that their lives aren't exciting, so they want to watch these exciting stories that, oh, this really happened, and drama and very soap opera-y.
Yeah, and I think what they were kind of hoping to demonstrate by talking about it and everything. Jenny, I'm right there with you. I watch tons of documentaries about cult leaders and that sort of thing all the time myself. But I think that they were trying to sort of open up the conversation and say, no, you can be into true crime for more than just, like, the gory details of the crime. You can be into true crime because you're a victim's advocate. You can be into true crime because you see it as a positive force.
Yeah, Michelle McNamara.
Right, like Michelle McNamara. And the show follows a kind of sort of loosey-goosey sort of format. Basically, the show starts, they spend a good half hour to an hour of the episode talking about their lives. Talking about, basically like we just did here, usually a lot more crazy, silly stories, that sort of thing than we just did. But
they're not crazy or silly at all.
But they'll tell stories about, like, one of them will talk about when she was a kid, which will lead into a discussion about, oh, last week this. They talk very openly about, they both had mental health issues in the past. And they'll talk about a history of addiction, things like that. And talk about all of the things that sort of helped them pull out of that. And it's a very funny, loose, freewheeling conversation.
Yeah, I'll be honest, when I read the book, I told Glen, I was like, it's fine, it's a fine book, but I thought it was going to be, I guess, a little bit more structured and kind of like this comedy, parody, real-life advice type of thing. And I was like, they're just talking about themselves the whole time. Which I was like, and that's lovely. They're great writers and their lives are very interesting. But I was like, I'm not learning on how to not get murdered here.
Which, when you buy a book titled Stay Sexy and Don't Get Murdered, and you're not familiar with the podcast, you might expect it to be a guide on how to stay sexy and not get murdered.
Yes. So, I was looking for beauty tips. I was looking for, like, carry your keys between your fingers, like, stuff like that. I mean, they do mention a lot, like, ladies are too polite. Like, don't be super polite because that's how you get murdered, which I agree with.
Yes, that's a running theme in the podcast. We try to keep the stream here PG-13 level, so I'm not going to say their phrase, but their phrase is politeness. So. And it's like some guy who walks up to you and is like, excuse me, can you help me? I'm looking for my puppy dog. My puppy dog is lost. Can you help me look over here for my puppy dog? They're like, get out of there. Yeah. Don't be the polite person who's like, oh, absolutely, I'll help you, kind stranger. Mm-hmm. Like, because that's how you wind up shoved into the back of a van.
Very
And there is a lot of that actual discussion of, like, what is the traditional, like, societal expectation of women versus how someone who is smart about the situation they're entering into going to handle that situation. And to that end, in addition to their regular show, they do these mini-sodes in between, which is people email them their personal stories, and they read their personal stories. My favorite was the woman who was sitting parked at a curb, and this guy just started to climb into the car next to her, just out of nowhere. And she said her immediate response was, no, you're going to fight for this one. So she dropped the car to drive and pulled out and started down a street in the middle of New York. And he was pounding on the roof and everything, and finally she slowed to a stop, and he got out, and he's like, I'm sorry, wrong car. My wife drives the same car, and walks away. And they're like, well, yeah, but you know what? They're like, you don't know that that's the truth. You still did the right thing.
That's society.
That's society, yeah. But it is, but they'll do, so, typical episode, discussion about their lives, they'll talk about their therapy, what's the great thing that their therapist just said to them. They'll talk a bit about their own backgrounds, their own histories, lots of swapping of funny stories, and lots of talking about what's going on with the show right now, since the show kind of exploded in popularity very suddenly, to the point that they now are presidents of their own podcast network. And then one of them, they try to, like, trade off back and forth which one starts, but they're very bad about keeping track of which one to switch. One of them will share a story that she has researched, which is typically about 30 to 45 minutes long. Then the other one shares a story that she has researched. To date, as far as I know, they have never wound up researching the same story for the same episode. Although they're always, their editor for the longest time, their producer was Steven. And they were always being like, Steven, you've got to tell us if one of us is planning to do a story the other one just told you they're doing. And I've always had the feeling that Steven was the kind of guy who would just sit there and let it happen, because that's good podcasting. That's going to be fun. But they'll do a couple of sort of mid-range deep dives into a story, and then they end their show with an effing hooray, which is basically each of them sharing a great thing that they experienced during the week. And it's anything from, oh, my therapist said this, and it just opened up so much for me, and now I have this, all the way down to, hey, have you seen the new season of Somebody Feed Phil? So just anything that is like, this made me happy this week, they share. So how do you translate this to a stage show?
Well, they already did. They went on tour.
Yes, they have gone on tour. But I'm talking about like a musical, a scripted musical, because that's what we're talking about here.
Well, I know the one thing that I've heard from other people that they really liked, my colleague who went to go see them on tour, loved that they made it about that city that they were in every night, so that really made it personable, and people really enjoyed it a lot more. And I kind of joke, but it's kind of serious, that, like, they bring in, I think it's Georgia's cat?
Yeah.
I was like, anybody that brings in their cat or dog, I'm already sold on it.
Yes, there's, I have said often that their cat, Elvis, is the factor that made me keep tuning in after listening to the first episode, because for the longest time every episode ended with Elvis, do you want a cookie? And Elvis is a Siamese cat, so you would hear, Elvis, do you want a cookie? And then you hear,
I'm a simple lady. I like it when people have pets.
I was like, okay, Elvis has something to say. I'm going to stick around and listen for Elvis.
Yeah.
And wound up falling in love with the podcast in general.
So yeah, but I was like, I feel that, there's a lot of opportunity for it. I think it's really kind of funny that we both pick podcasts that are primarily story driven. Like, you
Yeah.
know, it's like, it's not that they're doing this big world building in the podcast. It's, I'm a reporter or a journalist, even if it's amateur, and sitting at a desk and talking. And that's the gist of what each of us were kind of like trying to world build around, because even though you could absolutely, like you talked about on Wednesday, do a play or do a musical where it primarily is in a recording booth and they are recording and that is the story. And in fact, we've seen a lot of radio plays.
Yeah.
You know, like there's been a big resurgence in a lot of community theaters doing, you know, It's a Wonderful Life, a radio play, or A Christmas Carol, a radio play, because they're cheap, they're easy to produce, and you don't have to go a bunch of places. It's just what's happening in that chaos of the radio station, right? So I feel like you can absolutely do that, but I have a feeling you have a different idea.
I have a different idea. Yes, I have a very different idea. And let me talk real quick about, that's one idea you could go with. I'm not going with that idea. The other idea that was the first thing that occurred to me when we first started talking about adapting these podcasts was, I was like, oh, this could go in a really neat, like, sort of murder by death direction. Where if you've never seen Murder by Death, it's a phenomenal film. It's hilarious. It's basically a locked room murder mystery, kind of the Agatha Christie and Then There Were None style, except all of the people inside the house are parodies of popular detectives from detective stories. So you have a Miss Marple detective in there, you have a Sam Spade detective in there.
Nick and Nora.
You have Nick and Nora Charles are in there, basically. I believe Peter Falk is in the movie.
Yeah, he plays the Sam Spade character. There's the Charlie Chan character.
Yeah.
It's basically anything that you probably would have seen in, like, from 1920s to about the 1940s.
Yeah.
This was, like, what the parody was.
Yeah.
And it actually did. I think Truman Capote was in it.
Truman Capote is in it. He plays the Mr. Body, essentially.
Yeah.
He plays the guy who has invited them all there. So.
Yeah.
And so that was a direction that I started going down with this, and then I had two thoughts. You know, because I was like, it would be fun to just basically do Murder by Death. Only one of the couples is Karen and Georgia. But then I was like, one, that's a little bit too easy. And two, it's a little bit too close to what I've already pitched for the BuzzFeed Unsolved musical. Which that was, you know...
more Scooby-Dooey.
More Scooby-Dooey to that version. But this, I wanted to see if I could, like, stretch my brain a little bit and come up with something different. And so what I have come up with is... Like I said, maybe one of those things where people who are fans of the podcast buy a ticket and then they walk out going, well, that was not the podcast. Because I started thinking, well, could you take, like, stories that they've told and turn the stories into musical videos? Well, no, that doesn't feel like... You know, they're comedians doing a comedy podcast about murder, but that still feels less respectful to the stories than they are on their podcast. And I was like, well, why not focus instead on the direction of what they have done for building a community of people and what they have done for encouraging mental health. And their own experiences with using true crime as a way to sort of like find their way into their own mental health. So, my story...
I was going to say, I think you need to explain a bit further because I'm not sold just yet.
Yeah, we're going in this direction. So this is my pitch. And this is the point where she calls the waiter, asks for the bill, and like is like, well, this has been a wonderful production meeting. We're going in a different direction. But, so my pitch is, what you have is not, this is Karen and Georgia on the stage. Nor is it, this is a case that Karen and Georgia have spoken about specifically. What you have is the story of, in the first act, a woman dealing with anxiety in the modern world, who is a true crime fan. But because she is a true crime fan, she sees terrible, horrible crime happening all around her. So what you have is a lot of music about, in the first act, about how bad the world could be. So you have, I'm imagining the very first musical number being, the world is a horrible, scary place. That would actually be my title for the first musical number. And it would be about all of the terrible things that can happen to you when you leave your home. All of the terrible things that you could run into. You know, you could run into the next Charles Manson out there on the street. You could run into this and that. So that you get a feeling for how this character views the world. Then, for the first act, you send that character out into the world and you get to see their professional life, their personal life, and you get to see the things where, you know, there's someone lurking in the shadows over here. There's, you know, doesn't that sign on that building look a little bit suspicious? There's essentially increasing anxiety to the point that it starts to feel like a horror story. It starts to feel like, well, what is going on around this person? And it also starts to feel like, is this person going to even survive this play? Because they're not coping with it very well. So you would culminate in just this moment of, your first act would basically culminate in this moment of, the world is such a scary place, I'm not certain I even want to leave my house anymore. And then come back into the second act, and the second act is where we would start finding friends who reach out to her. It's where we would start finding her being willing to talk to people. And it would be where she starts discovering some of the simple rules. So things like F politeness and all of that. That as the second act goes, what you build toward more and more is, yes, the world can be very scary. But that doesn't mean it's scary all the time. That doesn't mean you're constantly in danger. And that doesn't mean you can't do anything about it. So what you have is the journey, essentially, where so many plays are like, build, descent into madness. Get the descent into madness over early. And then show reclining from the madness, receding from the madness, and creating a world that someone can live in where they are aware of danger in the world. They're aware of scary things in the world. But they're also aware that those scary things aren't always around them. And when they run into them, they have a feeling they know how to deal with it. Now, that's very broad strokes. As you can tell, I didn't say, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. Because I kind of changed directions halfway through working on the show.
I mean, I'll be honest, I'm not 100% sold on it.
Okay.
As mentioned, I know it's still working on it. I think, for me, it sounds, you can kind of correct me if it's wrong, but it sounds a bit like you're kind of talking about, like, Avenue Q. Here's this guy, just graduated from college, trying to figure out his way how to, like, live in the world, and through friendships realizes, hey, we can all make it together, right?
I can see that. I guess you could say that that's it's Avenue Q with serial killer ghosts instead of puppets. Yeah.
And I just feel like a lot of the things that you're talking about is really hard to do on stage. Like you said, oh, did that sign say this thing or this thing? You know, you can't necessarily maybe always change something like that or do it in a way that audiences would do it without being very farcical about it.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, even with all the technology with like, virtual scenescapes and stuff like that, you know, unless you kind of have a spotlight, you know, this is the, you know, I don't know, like San Franciscan arms, and then you see like bloody arms or something. Like, I mean, it really has to be this very dramatic, you know, everybody has to look at it at the same time because some audience members will get it and some won't if it's very subtle. I also feel like it just, to know that it would take that long through a whole act, a whole maybe hour and a half of descent into madness, and then maybe a whole 30 minutes to bring her back up to like, okay, now we're done. Because a lot of times with musicals, you will have about 2/3 in the first act, pee break and then about a third
Yeah.
left. And so I feel like introducing the friends way sooner, you know, and maybe it's just, like I said, maybe very farcical, like how Christmas Story had, here's all the evil townspeople, but they're just townspeople.
Yeah.
It's just in their head type of thing.
Right.
So I think that there's definitely something here. Not to be like, as a resident expert who wrote a mental health musical. You know, I think that it is going to probably be, you know, almost campy.
You know, you're right. I don't view it as campy in my head, but yeah, it is. I feel what I have done here, if I may critique my own idea, and that's what we do sometimes here, is we're basically...
We're figuring it out.
We're hashing
Be
through
part of the conversation. Tell us some
Yes,
stuff.
we're hashing through the idea and trying to figure it out and things like that. It's at times we're delivering a perfectly prepared pitch, and at other times we're the writer's room sitting around going, yes, what if we did that, but don't do that? So I think that if I were trying to think about, like, where am I going wrong in thinking about this, I feel like maybe I have committed the cardinal sin of starting from the theme and writing backwards.
Yeah, because I think, like, when you were talking about it, I thought very much of, like, that women on the edge of a nervous breakdown type of show. And I feel like the strength in that is it's the relationships of those women and how women experience the world. And so I feel like, I think overall it's a great concept, but I do think it would be very, very hard to be like, I could be murdered by this ex, I could be murdered by this guy, I could be murdered by drinking the wrong water, you know, It's like, that's a hard opening number to a show.
Yeah.
And even though I think that there's something in it, I think that I wouldn't want to start with, you know, I'm nervous about everything I see, and there's a serial killer waiting for me, and...
Well, I mean... I see what you mean. At the same time, I'm like, the opening theme for Monk was pretty awesome.
Well, we can't all be Randy Newman, okay?
But yeah, so let's backtrack then. So I just pitched you my let me stretch my brain idea. Let's go back then to Murder by Death. Let's take it back to that, and let's take the characters of Karen and Georgia. We stick them in a mansion.
Well, I mean, I don't like that idea either.
Okay.
I mean, I think you could go that way, but like you said, like, we've had this type of thing crop up, right?
Yeah.
You know, we've had this pop up where, well, we're going to put Shane and Ryan in a murder mystery house and blah, blah, blah. I feel like there's probably other directions you can kind of go into this, but I feel like, I think that there has to be this deciding factor. Are you going to go horror musical Jekyll and Hyde, or are you going to go horror musical Evil Dead?
I think in the case of My Favorite Murder, the appropriate decision is to go in the direction of horror musical Evil Dead.
Okay.
I think you have to have comedy, because gothic horror is not what I think of when I think of My Favorite Murder.
And I think the other thing that I kind of heard a lot was she's descending into madness, which is very Hitchcockian, which is a great film trope, you know, but we haven't really seen a successful Hitchcock musical. There's the 39 Steps. You know, there are murder mysteries and that type of stuff. You know, there are Agatha Christie shows that go on stage. Yeah. Not a whole heck of a lot of musicals. And the ones that have been, if I might be so bold, Curtains, Edwin Drood, they're not really, I think, things that have been big successes or things that people have really loved to the point, like, everybody has their own favorites and everybody likes them well enough, but, you know, they're no Cats.
All right, then, so let's jump sideways into something you brought up, a show which I'm very fond of the music for as well, and Women on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown.
Yeah, can I tell you what I thought of when you're kind of, like, talking about the pitch?
Sure.
All right. So,
let's see if she's about to jump to where I was about to jump to.
I was going to lean really heavily in towards music. Because, like I said, that's what I know Karen Kilgariff for, is comedy musician. And I think that you could use them, or I like this idea of this anonymous lady group of friends who support each other. But I felt like, maybe the feeling of it is maybe a bit more Josie and the Pussycats, like a band on tour. Or a band having kind of this experience and having women kind of support each other that way. But the backdrop is murder and mystery and true crime and the police won't listen and, we're going to do it ourselves. Maybe almost a bit, and I don't want to, do any spoilers, but, maybe moving a little bit more towards, the agency of a Nancy Drew.
Yeah.
But like I said, I was I think for me, leaning really heavy into, we're going to deal with our emotions through song, and there also just happens to be the serial killer after us killing band members or whatever, might be fun.
Well, and you are kind of in the realm of what I was thinking, which was you turn it into, like we just talked about, they did the live show and everything, you turn it into a backstage musical about doing the live show. Where you have them getting their chairs and their rugs and stuff that they're known for having on stage at all of their live shows and everything, but you throw in the element of the killer picking people off one by one. And I think you could do that as hey, we're introduced to the stage manager. Oh no, the stage manager for the venue just got murdered. We've got to find out who this is, gang. And then building up, and I think the point, what I would do is, you build up, you have a couple of murders, the people they've been introduced into and everything like that, and then, someone killed Stephen. So you go into the second act with, Stephen isn't here anymore, Stephen got killed.
And that would be a great re-entry in Act 2.
Yes.
Stephen isn't here anymore.
Yes. So you could have... So that is the moment when you introduce the concept of real peril, because people who know My Favorite Murder know Stephen, and they love Stephen. And Stephen is a good guy. He does a lot of work in different podcasts and everything. He loves cats. He has his own podcast all about taking care of cats.
Well, and that's the other thing, is I would also really love almost like a Salem from Sabrina, the Teenage Witch moment, where it's like, Elvis, you can talk. Anything's possible when you're having a hard time. This is a coping mechanism.
Now let's talk about something looking like a scene out of Avenue Q.
Yes. I just like talking cats.
Yes. Although I kind of like...
Because, I like that idea of a descent into madness, where it's a bit more, Saturday morning breakfast cereal type of moment.
That would be fun, and what would be even more fun is you do this musical number about anything's possible when you're having a hard time, and you have the big musical number.
And I feel like it's supposed to be very positive, you're strong, you can overcome it, but it's your brain is doing this coping mechanism that you're seeing bizarre things so that you can preserve yourself.
And then at the very end you have if you were doing it in film you would do an actual cutaway and everything, but you have the moment in the song of are you okay? You've been talking to Elvis's carrier for a long time now.
And I think that does get kind of a little bit more into the Evil Dead musical. You are kind of pushing it into kind of this comedy musical romp, which I feel that's what I would expect a lot of people to anticipate, even though they are not it's not a musical podcast. I don't want to sit there and sell this musical podcast, but it's not that. But I feel both of them are fairly musical, even if they're not these big trained singers or anything. Right. They both have a real ear for stuff. They've had a lot of moments where music has been important to them in their lives. And so I feel you could have these very silly and very serious moments and kind of jump through it without being disrespectful to a real case.
Yeah.
And make it really kind of more about them. And it's here are the rules for staying alive.
Yes.
Which sounds like a great musical theater song already. The rules for staying alive. I mean, just get Dua Lipa and, you know, a little bit of, you know, Joe Iconis in there. It's going to be great.
Get someone to show up to play, like, the old woman who takes care of the theater. Get Rita Moreno and put her on stage. Anything's instantly better with Rita Moreno, so. Yeah. Okay, so we've worked it out.
Yay!
This is the direction we're going with the story now.
Yeah, because I was like, I think that it would be majorly female-driven. You could talk about some serious concepts of people who have gone on to solve cold cases or get into ideas of true crime and murder. And I also kind of like the idea of, like, you know, it's not this waiting for rescue.
Yeah.
Oh, no, the police can't handle it. We're going to handle it. But then it's, like, in a very real reason for them to be there, not just like, oh, the police won't handle it, we're coming and we're a band, but it's more, well, we got to solve our own problems, and, you know, here's how we solved our own problem, by not being polite, by being aware of our surroundings, you know, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, there you go. So I think between the two of us, we've got a great show now. Woo! And an option to put a cat puppet on stage for a number, which always makes everything better.
Yeah.
How many animal puppets have we had on stage in our shows so far?
A lot.
We had Hocus Pocus. Hocus Pocus had...
well, you made him a real person, though, so...
Yeah. Well, we debated back and forth about the cat and the real person.
I just like puppets, okay? You can't be raised around Jim Henson Muppets and not want to have a puppet every single time that you have an option to do a puppet. Now, the puppet might get cut, but you're still going to propose it.
Well, now, in my defense, I did not suggest cutting the puppet and the cat entirely and just having a human. I suggested reducing the role of the cat puppet and having a human take on the bulk of the heavy lifting.
Hey, you can do whatever you want to say. I'm going to toss in a puppet. Warhorse was a game changer. Puppets and everything.
Is this our new t-shirt? Put a puppet in it? Like, you've got a show, it's not working, what should you do? Put a puppet in it. Why not? Alright, so we've got My Favorite Murder, the musical. Backstage murder comedy.
Love it.
And, alright, not to spoil the script that we will probably never actually write, unless Karen and Georgia saw the link on Twitter and are sitting in our chat right now just waiting to be like, make this script for us.
Well, and also, you know, this is a fine opportunity for, you know, people watching right now, or people watching on YouTube. You know, put your comments down below. We're not going to have a poll or anything. We're old people. We don't know how to do that poll thing. But, you know, maybe talk about, like, well, which version did you like? Did you like kind of Glen's original proposal? Did you want to see maybe a murder mystery like Murder by Death? Or do you kind of like the more, like I always say, like, Josie and the Pussycats, but lots of murder.
I'll tell you right now, of the three, I want to see the third one.
Our audience.
Yeah, I want to see the backstage murder comedy.
Yeah.
But yes, our audience, let us know which version you would like to see. But here was my thought. So, which do you think is the better outcome for this third musical? In terms of comedy and all of this. Is it actually like a murder case that they solve? And they find the murderer, and it's a Scooby-Doo thing of we actually solved the case. Hooray us. Or is it, Karen, surprise, we know it's your birthday, so we put together this whole murder mystery so you can enjoy solving a murder on your birthday. I hated it. What are you talking about?
Well, I always feel like it should be the second. I don't think it should be a real murderer. I think it should be something that just is completely misinterpreted. Like, you know, Stephen went out to go get the cake or something.
Yeah, you got to have Stephen alive at the end.
But I think that it should be like, just because nothing happened doesn't mean you shouldn't still be cautious and not get into strangers' cars and, you know, open the door to everybody.
It could be like, so you mean this whole thing, oh, well, actually, the venue manager, that was a real murder. But the police solved that like an hour ago. As Ginny votes for the second option. She votes for not a real murder. So,
Yeah, and I think, like, that could even be a trope where it's like, well, it's always the significant other.
yeah.
It wasn't even anybody at the theater.
Vince, put the microphone down. As Vince is always going along with them, I believe. He's married to Georgia, and he's like a wrestling fan who has his own wrestling podcast. But he's always out there with the microphone, being like, whenever they accept questions from the audience or something, he's out there with the microphone. So you could have a nice, it's always the significant other. Vince, where were you?
There you go.
All right. It's always the significant other would be a great title for a song in the show. Yes. All right. So, thanks guys for tuning in and listening to us hash through ideas and figure out what we liked, what we didn't like.
Yeah.
Thanks for spending time with us. I know I really enjoy being able to sit here and talk with you guys on the regular like this. I enjoy. Mom also likes the second one. Let's see. So the lead sings. So the lead sings, "This is how you keep from being murdered," as he dances stage left, and an arm appears from the curtain, and he gets his throat slashed. Yes. Whoever it is who's singing the "This is how you keep from getting murdered" song has to die at the end of the song.
Or at the beginning, and then somebody has to take over the song.
Yes. All right, we're so glad you could join us today too, Jenny. It's always nice to see you in the chat. We love seeing you guys pop in and discuss this stuff with us. This is a crazy thing we're doing, but I love doing it.
Yes. I love musical theater.
Yeah.
I think it's just been really fun to kind of explore something that, we normally just share with each other a lot, and it's been really wonderful to see the type of reception that it's been part of people's lives since March.
Yes.
And we're going into July, so that's really, like, we're always really appreciative for that, like, every single day.
All right.
It's an honor that we get to do this and to be part of your 2 hours of your week. You know, that's a lot of time we're asking from folks. So thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much. And if you know of anybody who you think would enjoy this show, feel free to share it with them. I'm going to get this week's episodes today and Wednesdays posted up on YouTube. I'm going to try to get that done by this evening.
Or at least by the end of the weekend. Like, we're trying to get things done so we can start doing the other fun things that we really enjoy, like putting up ads and maybe doing, live watches and that type of stuff.
Because
I'll have to really think about how much I'm working so that I can kind of devote a little bit more time to this because I really enjoy it. But we'll get it figured out, for sure.
Yeah, and there's only so many times I can use, but we were moving as an excuse, so... All right, so thank you guys for tuning in. Have a great weekend. We love you. We think the world of you. And until next time, take care of yourselves out there because we're not there to take care of you.